$1 billion company used to be a miracle.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
mean, it was the absolute pinnacle of business achievement. You'd read these legendary stories of like 20 people crammed into a garage somewhere.
Usually eating instant ramen, right?
Exactly. Eating instant ramen, sleeping under desks, and somehow defying the gravitational laws of the old industrial economy to build something worth $1 billion.
Yeah.
It was so rare, so, I don't know, mythical that we gave it a magical name. The unicorn.
Yeah.
But today, $1 billion valuation is just, well, it's basically a math formula generated by the venture capital machine.
Right.
The era of the unicorn is dead.
It really is. The frontier essentially became a routine commute. What used to be this cosmic stroke of luck is now just a standardized pipeline.
And that pipeline is exactly what we're exploring today. Welcome to the Deep Dive, by the way. Our mission today is exploring a massive tectonic shift in how the world's most powerful entities are being built.
Because we aren't looking at those billion-dollar unicorns anymore.
No, we really aren't. We are looking at what comes next. Trillion-dollar civilization-scale platforms known as Solaras.
Right.
And our source material for this entire journey is an incredibly provocative book by Paramendra Kumar Bhagat. It's called Unicorn to Solara, A Journey of Imagination.
What's fascinating here is how the book introduces this concept before you even, open it.
Oh, the cover art.
Yeah, the cover art is this serene cosmic sun with its eyes closed. It's radiating these intense bands of yellow and blue light over a vast, geometric, mountainous landscape.
It's striking.
It is, but it's not just a pretty picture. It is the perfect mechanical metaphor for what we're unpacking today. We aren't talking about a mythical horse running across the ground anymore.
Right.
We're talking about the celestial body that dictates the gravity and the climate of the landscape itself.
I love that distinction. A sun doesn't just participate in the landscape, it sustains it. And that is our mission today. We want to extract the core blueprint of how these massive ecosystem engines operate. And I want to speak directly to you, the listener, for a second.
Yeah, this is crucial.
Whether you are an entrepreneur trying to build the next massive platform, or an investor placing bets on the future, or honestly just a citizen trying to navigate a world that is being rapidly rewired.
This deep dive is for you.
It is, because while we are throwing around the word trillion, this is really about the psychology of scale. It's about overcoming what the author calls the imagination gap and understanding the invisible infrastructure that dictates almost every action in your daily life.
It's a profound shift in perspective. Like, we're moving from a reality where companies simply participate in the economy to a reality where companies actually are the economy.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with why the unicorn died. Because the author makes a brilliant point, I think. The term didn't die because it was inaccurate.
Right, it died because it became entirely ordinary.
Yeah, but how did the hardest thing in business become ordinary?
It really comes down to three converging forces. You've got the era of cheap capital, globalization, and tech compression.
Okay, let's break those down.
So, for over a decade, interest rates were essentially sitting at zero. Institutional money like pension funds, massive endowments, they were desperate for any kind of return.
Because they weren't getting it from bonds anymore.
Exactly. So that money just flooded into venture capital. The market stopped rewarding companies for actual current profitability and started rewarding the story of future dominance.
Which birthed the whole religion of blitzscaling.
Yes.
Right, and for anyone who hasn't lived in the startup world, blitzscaling is basically the playbook of intentionally burning massive, almost terrifying amounts of cash.
Just to capture market share before a competitor can even tie their shoes.
Yeah, it's the lose money now, become the only toll road in town, and turn a profit later model.
Exactly. You subsidize the user's ride or their food delivery or their software just to crush the competition. And combined with globalization, the total addressable market for a digital product was suddenly the entire planet.
Right.
A startup in Lagos could instantly serve a client in London or Tokyo without opening a local office. But the real catalyst, the thing that turned the unicorn into a factory output, was tech compression.
This is where the mechanics of building a company fundamentally changed. I mean, if you wanted to build a global business in the 1990s, you needed an army.
You needed like 5,000 employees.
Yeah, you had to build physical call centers, manage complex global logistics networks, housed massive refrigerated rooms full of private IT servers. You basically had to build the tools to build your business.
Right.
But with tech compression, the ladder of achievement completely collapsed.
That's the perfect way to phrase it. The ladder collapsed. Suddenly, with the rise of cloud computing and software as a service, you are just renting software over the internet instead of building it from scratch.
Right.
You could achieve that same global scale with maybe 50 employees.
Right.
You didn't need to buy servers, you just rented them from Amazon.
You didn't build a payment processor, you just plugged in Stripe.
Exactly. The friction of starting a company dropped to zero, which meant the path to $1 billion was fully mapped out.
I hear what you're saying about the formula becoming standardized. The unicorn basically became a common horse with a decorative horn glued to its head.
Pretty much.
But I have to push back a little here. If technology essentially ate that ladder, making it easier to scale with a tiny team, isn't $1 billion still a massive achievement?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, $1 billion is 1,000 millions. Why diminish that?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the leap from a unicorn to a Solara isn't really a financial leap, it is an imaginative one.
Okay, how so?
You were absolutely right that $1 billion is a tremendous amount of wealth, but unicorn thinking is ultimately about competitive disruption within a system that already exists.
Like making a slightly better taxi service?
Exactly. It's about building a slightly better customer relationship tool or a faster delivery app and optimizing your entire company for evaluation. The end goal of a unicorn is an exit.
A liquidity event.
Right. You sell to a bigger company or go public, and the founders cash out. The unicorn is a temporary vessel. It's a rocket booster designed to burn intensely bright, push a payload into orbit, and then detach and just burn up in the atmosphere.
Ah, okay. And a Solara.
Solaras are about permanence. They're about inevitability. They don't want to win a specific niche market. They want to create an entirely new reality where the old competitors don't even make sense anymore.
So if the fast, exit-obsessed horse is no longer the frontier, we really need to define the anatomy of this new mythic creature. Like, what actually separates a very large, profitable company from a Solara?
Well, the book argues a Solara is effectively a civilization-level operating system.
Right.
It does. The author outlines 5 very specific structural requirements that define a Solara, and the first is planetary distribution. Now, this doesn't mean operating like an old-school multinational corporation where you have a headquarters in New York and then you slowly open a branch in Paris, figure out the local tax code, and hire a regional manager.
Yeah, it's the old way.
Right. Planetary distribution means your platform scales universally across borders without having to rewrite the core business model. You expand the way a new language expands.
Organically.
Organically, yeah, rather than fighting a military logistics campaign to claim territory.
And that expansion relies heavily on the second requirement, which is global network effects.
Yes.
But we aren't talking about the network effect of a simple messaging app where the app gets better just because your friends are on it.
Yeah.
Solara-grade network effects are multi-layered. They're structural.
Yes, and that structural depth is what makes them so impenetrable. A multi-layered network effect means you have developers building tools for other developers on your platform. You have governments interacting with other governments through your infrastructure.
So the network isn't just a place to chat.
No, it becomes a tangled, interconnected web of dependencies, which naturally leads to the third requirement, infrastructure-level influence.
This is the dependency factor. You know you're dealing with a Solara when you stop buying from them and start passing through them.
Right.
It's the difference between a boutique shop and the paved road that leads to the shop. You can choose not to go to the boutique.
Oh.
You cannot choose to avoid the road.
Precisely. And the entity managing that road requires the fourth element, AI native systems.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
We are way past the era of a company that just, uses artificial intelligence to write a better marketing email. In a Solara, intelligence is the central nervous system. It coordinates the massive planetary complexity of the platform in real time, autonomously.
And when you combine planetary scale, multi-layered networks, infrastructure dependency, and AI, you get the fifth requirement.
Economic gravity.
Right. The mass of the company becomes so dense that it literally bends the fabric of the economy. Entirely separate industries find themselves naturally orbiting this platform.
Competitors don't even compete on equal terms anymore. They are forced to adapt to the new baseline of reality that the Solara just created.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I know exactly what you, the listener, are thinking right now. You're thinking, isn't this just a fancy, poetic, over-intellectualized rebranding for big tech? Yeah. And we're just talking about Apple, Amazon, and Google, right?
It's the most natural question to ask, honestly. But the author draws a very sharp distinction here. Big tech is an industry label. It describes companies that sell consumer electronics or search engines or social media.
Right.
Solara is a structural label. Now, are some big tech companies Solaras? Yes. But a company could be in renewable energy, biomanufacturing, global logistics, or even advanced education, and be a Solara.
So there's really about the behavior of the entity, not the product itself.
Exactly. Think about Standard Oil and the early railroad monopolies.
Oh, interesting.
They were the proto-Solaras of the industrial age. They didn't sell software. They sold the ability for the rest of the country to function.
Wow.
A big tech company might sell you a very expensive premium enterprise software suite. A Solara provides the operating system that your entire civilization runs on. It produces economic heat, enables new forms of life to grow on top of it, and coordinates human activity at a planetary scale.
That is just a staggering difference in ambition. To build something that structural, you clearly can't rely on the traditional Silicon Valley hustle.
No, you really can't.
You can't just run some targeted social media ads, growth hack your way to 1 billion users and call it a day. You have to literally rewire how you perceive reality itself.
Which is incredibly difficult because of what the author calls the imagination gap.
Yes, the imagination gap. Let's dig into that.
This is perhaps the single biggest psychological barrier to building a Solara. The imagination gap is our deeply ingrained human tendency to apply linear thinking to an exponential world.
We have this profound bias to assume that the present moment is permanent. We look around at our institutions, our laws, our banking systems, and we subconsciously treat them like mountains or rivers, like they're just natural, unchangeable facts of the landscape.
We forget that every single one of those systems was just invented by regular people a few decades or maybe centuries ago.
But the Solara founder looks at the present world entirely differently. They don't see permanent mountains. They see the present as outdated software.
It's just legacy code waiting to be rewritten.
Right. They aren't just product designers trying to make a button more clickable. They are systems thinkers. They engineer civilization-scale incentives.
Yeah, they figure out how to structure a system so that it is in the selfish best interest of users, governments, and outside developers to adopt their platform.
And doing that requires managing a psychological high-wire act. The text talks about operating on 2 clocks simultaneously.
The dual clocks, yes.
The founder has to obsessively manage the short-term clock of survival, making sure the servers don't crash today, hitting this quarter's payroll, while simultaneously managing the decade-scale clock of planetary transformation.
And maintaining that dual timeline requires a level of obsession that, from the outside, looks a lot like delusion. But the author draws a brilliant, razor-sharp line between the two.
Yes. I loved this part. Delusion is a commitment to a fantasy while actively rejecting new evidence.
Right.
If the market tells you no, and you say the market is wrong, you're delusional. Obsession, on the other hand, is a relentless commitment to a goal while remaining highly responsive to evidence.
Exactly. The obsessed founder treats a massive failure as data. It's not a personal attack, it's a telemetry reading.
They treat a regulatory roadblock or a collapsed supply chain as a pure engineering problem to be solved, not a reason to quit.
And this mindset is what allows them to do something crucial: authorizing the future.
Authorizing the future.
Most people wait for permission. They self-censor their ambitions. They look at a broken healthcare system and think, well, if it were possible to fix this globally, someone smarter would have done it by now.
I want you to think about your own life for a second. Think about the friction you merely tolerate on a daily basis.
Oh, there's so much of it.
Right. You tolerate mind-numbing bureaucracy at the DMV. You tolerate a fragmented, confusing medical system. You tolerate financial exclusion or waiting 3 days for a bank transfer to clear. You just accept it as the way things are.
But that tolerance is blinding you to invisible planetary scale markets.
Exactly. The Solara founder looks at that exact same friction and sees a civilization-scale inefficiency ready to be replaced.
So what does this all mean for the builder? It means the future isn't something you predict, it's something you authorize.
It's a founder stepping up to the microphone of reality and declaring, we are no longer doing it the old way. We are claiming legitimacy over a new system.
But once you have that architect's mindset, once you've authorized the future in your own head, how do you actually capture those invisible markets?
Because the trick is you don't compete in them, you invent them.
This is where the old MBA business playbook gets completely thrown out the window. In traditional business, demand is treated like a fixed landscape. It's a pie. You fight your competitors for a slightly larger slice of that existing pie, but Solaras don't fight for market share.
No.
They create entirely new markets out of thin air by removing what the author calls cognitive friction.
They unlock latent desires, things people always wanted to do but couldn't, because fulfilling that desire used to be too expensive or too confusing or too time-consuming.
And the book outlines a very specific mechanical flywheel for how this happens. Cost collapse leads to habit formation, which leads to ecosystem explosion.
Okay, let's break that flywheel down with the historical examples the author provides, because I think this is where the theory really hits reality.
Let's do it.
Take the mobile internet. Before smartphones, the internet was a destination. You had to sit down at a bulky desk computer.
You had to physically go to it.
Exactly. The mobile internet didn't just put web pages on a smaller screen. It completely collapsed the friction of connectivity. By making connection instant and portable, it formed a new human habit.
Right. We started checking our phones in line for coffee or in bed.
And that habit created an ecosystem explosion, an entirely new market that literally ate human time.
Or look at cloud computing. Before the cloud, launching a software company meant spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on physical hardware. It was a massive financial friction.
A huge barrier to entry.
Huge. Cloud providers like AWS collapsed that cost. You could spin up a server with a credit card in 5 minutes. That cost collapse formed a habit of rapid experimentation, which exploded into a virtual factory revolution where millions of apps were built on top of that infrastructure.
Digital payments did the exact same thing. They turned the friction of trust, having to physically verify cash or a paper check, into instant software.
Yeah.
But the ultimate accelerant of this flywheel, the thing that is rewriting the rules right now, is generative AI, because AI is collapsing cognitive scarcity.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, AI is the ultimate engine for creating a Solara. The era of the traditional software company is frankly over.
Yeah, traditional software is just static, frozen logic.
Yeah.
You write a rule, and the software executes that rule forever until a human updates it.
Right. But a Solara in the AI era is not a software company. It is a multi-agent civilization. The author breaks down 4 distinct structural roles that AI plays in these companies, and each one fundamentally changes the mechanics of business.
Let's walk through exactly how these roles function, because it's honestly mind-bending.
Yeah.
First, AI acts as the workforce.
Yeah.
And we aren't just talking about automating repetitive tasks here. We're talking about synthetic labor that drives the marginal cost of execution towards zero.
Right.
When you need to translate your platform to 50 languages or summarize 10 million user reviews to find a bug, you don't hire 1,000 analysts. The AI workforce does it instantly for fractions of a penny.
The second role is AI as the product designer.
Oh, this one is fascinating.
It really is.
Yeah.
Traditionally, a company relies on a committee of human managers who look at past data, argue in a boardroom, and create a static product roadmap for the next year.
Very slow.
Incredibly slow. In a Solara, the AI is constantly ingesting population-scale data in real time. It notices that users in Brazil are navigating the interface differently than users in Japan, and it autonomously evolves the product's layout or features to optimize the experience. It is continuous, real-time evolution.
The third role might be the most powerful, though. AI as the operations manager, the invisible CEO.
Right.
When a company scales to 1 billion users, the sheer complexity of the logistics would just crush a traditional human bureaucracy. Think about global supply chains. If a storm shuts down a port in Tokyo, a human middle manager might take 3 days to realize the impact, have 6 meetings, and slowly reroute shipping through Lagos.
By which point it's too late.
Exactly. An AI operations manager detects the weather pattern, models the supply chain disruption, and autonomously reroutes the shipping lines before a human even realizes it's raining.
And finally, you have the fourth role, infinite customer support. And this is really about building trust at scale.
What's up?
Well, if a user has a problem at 3:00 a.m., they don't want to wait on hold for a call center. AI provides instant, deeply context-aware resolution in every language simultaneously, 24/7.
If I can use a mechanical analogy here, a traditional company is like a massive, static brick building. You design the blueprint, you lay the bricks, and the building just sits there.
Doesn't move.
Right. If the weather changes or the neighborhood shifts, you have to bring in a construction crew to manually tear down walls and renovate it. It's slow and it's expensive.
Yeah.
But an AI-native Solara is like an incredibly advanced adaptive immune system. It detects threats, mutates, learns, and physically restructures its own defenses daily based on the environment it's operating in.
What's fascinating here is that this entirely inverts how a company handles growth.
Inverts it.
Yeah, because for the last century, corporations scaled by adding mass. If you got bigger, you had to hire more employees, add layers of middle management, build more HR departments.
More overhead.
Tons of overhead. You added bureaucracy, which naturally made the company slower and more fragile. Solara's scale by adding leverage. They scale through compounding intelligence. The larger the Solara gets, the more data the AI ingests, meaning the company actually gets faster, smarter, and more efficient as it grows.
But there is a catch.
There always is.
To feed that adaptive immune system, to train that AI engine so it actually gets smarter, you need an ocean of data. And to get that data, you have to reach billions of people.
Right.
You have the AI engine, you've invented the demand, but you cannot reach planetary scale by just buying a bunch of banner ads on the internet. And that brings us to the mechanics of reaching the globe, planetary distribution, and Solara economics.
This is a massive paradigm shift. In the unicorn era, advertising was the lifeblood of growth. You raised venture capital and you handed it directly to Facebook or Google to buy attention.
You were renting an audience.
Exactly. In the Solara era, advertising is viewed as a tax on the incompetent.
I love that phrase.
It's so true, though. A trillion-dollar platform cannot rely on rented distribution channels. It has to become the distribution channel. Unicorns run ads. Solara has become the road system itself.
The text details the specific mechanisms they use to achieve this kind of distribution without ever asking for permission. They engineer viral loops directly into the utility of the product, like a payment app, where you literally can't use it unless you invite the person you owe money to.
Right.
They build platform ecosystems, which means they create an environment where other entrepreneurs can build their own businesses on top of the Solara's infrastructure. When those smaller businesses hunt for customers, they're doing the distributing for the Solara.
And then there is the ultimate Trojan horse of distribution, embedded finance.
I love this concept. Explain how embedding finance works as a distribution mechanism.
Well, money is the universal language of human coordination. It touches absolutely everything. If you build a platform, say a communication tool or a logistics network, and you embed the ability to hold, send, and receive money seamlessly within that tool, you instantly become a daily habit.
Because people care about their money.
Exactly. People might check a social app once a week, but they check their money multiple times a day. Once you hold their financial utility, you can bundle other services on top of it. You bundle communication, commerce, and identity until you achieve the Holy Grail. You become default infrastructure.
And once you cross that threshold into default infrastructure, the economics of the company become absolutely mind-bending.
They really do.
The book dives deep into Solara economics, which explores the friction point where near-zero marginal cost meets infinite global demand.
Right.
When an industrial factory prints a physical good like a car, it costs money in raw steel, rubber, and human labor for every single unit.
Every single one.
But when a Solara replicates digital value or grants access to an AI intelligence, the marginal cost of adding user number 1,000,000,001 is practically zero.
You combine that near-zero replication cost with subscription empires. Instead of selling a product once and hoping the customer comes back next year, you turn episodic revenue into a continuous, predictable river of capital.
And then there's tokenization.
Yes, turning ownership and loyalty points into programmable code.
Yeah.
And you fuel it all with data flywheels, where every single interaction a user makes trains the AI to make the product slightly better for the next user. It is an unprecedented compounding value machine.
Okay, wait, I have to jump in here and push back on the economics of this.
Go for it.
If replication is essentially free, if AI drops the marginal cost of creating and delivering this value to near zero, how do they actually capture $1 trillion in value? Don't the fundamental rules of economics dictate that if something costs nothing to produce, competition will inevitably drive the consumer price down to zero?
Right.
Doesn't the monetary value just evaporate into the ether?
That is the exact paradox of the digital age. It's a brilliant question, and the author answers it by explaining that value capture has shifted to two entirely new currencies, attention and trust.
Attention and trust.
When marginal costs collapse to zero, profit is no longer derived from putting a markup on the manufacturing of a good. Profit is a function of distribution and trust. Attention is the tax base of the digital city. If you command the world's attention, you command the market.
But attention is fleeting. I mean, a viral video has attention, but it's not a trillion-dollar company.
Exactly, which is why attention without trust is highly unstable. Trust is the actual reserve currency of a Solara.
Right.
Trust is the mechanism that allows a platform to expand from just being a fun place to post photos into a system you trust to hold your life savings, verify your identity, and manage your healthcare data.
So they print value by decoupling their growth from their physical costs, yes.
Mm,
But they capture that value by holding the deepest, most secure reserves of human trust on the planet.
exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
If your company is this massive, this profitable, and it commands this much global attention, competitors and bad actors are inevitably going to try to attack you or clone you. But the traditional moats that protected monopolies for the last century, things like government patents, exclusive physical supply chains, or massive manufacturing plants, those are eroding. The software itself is getting easier and cheaper to copy by the day.
Yeah, you can clone an app in a weekend now.
Exactly. So if the technology is easy to replicate, how does a company avoid being instantly cloned? How do you defend a Solara?
Because the code itself is easier to replicate, the things that cannot be replicated become the ultimate defensive walls. The author argues that credibility is the ultimate asset. The new moats are trust, identity, and network sovereignty.
The book introduces this concept of the trust stack. It's a multi-layered fortress.
Let's walk through the layers.
Yeah. The base layer is identity, cryptographically verifying exactly who someone is on a global scale. The next layer is reputation, quantifying their history of good behavior in the system. Then comes verification, proving that claims made on the platform are authentic. Once you have those three, you unlock trust-based commerce, allowing complete strangers across the globe to transact significant amounts of money safely without fear of fraud,
And on top of commerce, you have to build truth infrastructure.
which is huge right now.
It is. In an era of deepfakes, infinite synthetic content, and AI hallucinations, a Solara must create a shared, verified baseline of reality for its users. And finally, you wrap all of these layers in community.
Community as a moat.
Community is a fortress because it creates massive emotional switching costs. A competitor might copy your software features perfectly, but if your user's entire identity, reputation, and community reside on your platform, they won't leave.
The technical switching cost is zero, but the emotional and social switching cost is insurmountable.
Exactly. The biggest companies of the future won't be the ones with the sleekest software or the best physical assets, but the ones with the deepest, most undeniable legitimacy.
And this ties directly into Chapter 10 of the book, which focuses heavily on building the rails of civilization. The underlying principle of a Solara is brilliantly simple. Build what others must build on.
And the examples the author uses really ground this massive concept in physical reality. They aren't just building software, they're building hard infrastructure.
Like what?
Energy grids, for instance. Electricity is the new absolute bottleneck for AI compute. A true Solara might invest in next-generation nuclear or massive renewable grids because they need the power to run their own nervous system.
Or satellite internet, owning the literal roads in the sky, bypassing local telecom monopolies entirely.
Right.
Then there's robotics as a service. This is where the physical world shifts to a subscription model. You aren't buying a $100,000 robot for your warehouse. You are subscribing to physical labor by the hour, powered by the Solara's AI brain.
The author also touches on biomanufacturing.
Oh, right, factories that literally grow synthetic materials, medicines, or foods at a cellular level rather than assembling them from extracted parts.
And of course, fintech and education rails, providing the underlying inescapable roads for moving money and developing human capital globally.
True power is invisible. You don't celebrate the plumbing in your house, you just expect the water to flow. You don't think about the electrical grid until the lights suddenly go out.
Right.
Solaras want to be the plumbing of human society. They want to be the invisible underlying substrate that modern life requires just to function.
And this is a massive, but becoming the plumbing of civilization means you are no longer just a software business optimizing for quarterly earnings. You are essentially operating as a quasi-government.
And that brings terrifying, unprecedented responsibilities.
It really does.
Which leads us directly into the Solara paradox.
Yeah.
The complex web of governance, ethics, and the shadows these massive suns cast.
The Solara paradox states a very simple rule. The bigger and more powerful you become, the more you must actively restrain yourself.
Because the stakes are so high.
Exactly. When a startup is small, they can embrace that old Silicon Valley motto of move fast and break things, because the blast radius of their mistakes is tiny. If a new app crashes, a few thousand people are mildly annoyed.
But when a Solara breaks things, they might be breaking a national election, collapsing global supply chains, or compromising public health infrastructure.
Right. The founder inevitably has to transition from a ruthless conqueror into a nuanced diplomat.
The book dives into some incredibly deep structural frameworks here regarding how these platforms maintain their legitimacy. The text contrasts digital authoritarianism against freedom tech and surveillance capitalism against empowerment capitalism.
And we should frame how we're talking about this.
Yes, I want to be super clear about how we are approaching this. The author approaches these concepts purely as structural frameworks for long-term business survival, not as moral endorsements of any real-world political systems. We are looking at the mechanics of how a planetary platform avoids being dismantled by society. We aren't taking sides here.
Exactly. We're just unpacking the author's theory. And the author's premise is that a platform's underlying architecture inherently makes political choices, whether the founder wants to or not.
Like the censorship dilemma, for example.
Right. A Solara has to constantly balance the absolute right to free speech against the need for civilizational stability and preventing algorithmic radicalization.
Or the choice in how they monetize their users.
Yeah.
The book defines surveillance capitalism as a model where the user is treated as the product, their data is extracted and sold to the highest bidder to manipulate their behavior.
And then on the other side, you have empowerment capitalism.
Right, which is a model where the platform builds long-term trust by giving the user absolute agency, privacy, and control over their own digital lives.
The author argues this entirely from a perspective of network sovereignty. Extraction and digital authoritarianism might offer a platform incredible short-term control and rapid revenue.
It looks good on a Coriolis report.
Exactly. But mechanically, over a decade-long timeline, those models eventually trigger societal backlash. Users rebel, sovereign governments step in with heavy-handed regulations, and the ultimate moat, the trust moat, collapses.
So empowerment and freedom tech are presented in the book not just as ethical choices, but as the only sustainable mathematical path to securing long-term legitimacy and network sovereignty.
Right.
So how does a tech founder, someone whose entire training, incentive structure, and brain wiring has been optimized to out-innovate competitors, move at light speed, and grow at all costs, suddenly transition into a constitutional architect who has to somehow scale morality?
This raises an important question, and it is perhaps the single hardest problem in modern business: scaling morality.
How do you do that?
Well, the author insists that for a Solara, ethics cannot be a PR exercise. You cannot just write a nice mission statement and paste it on the wall of the cafeteria. Ethics must be treated as hard engineering.
You have to literally code morality into the machine.
Yes. You have to build algorithmic audits, transparent appeal processes for users, and bias detection systems directly into the core architecture of the AI. You have to anticipate the shadows your son will cast.
Right.
Furthermore, the book argues that regulation isn't a threat at this scale, it's a feature.
That is so counterintuitive to the startup mindset. I mean, startups hate regulation.
Startups do. Solaras embrace it.
Right.
Embracing and even helping to shape thoughtful regulation builds the deep trust and legitimacy required to become default infrastructure.
Because governments want stability.
Exactly. If the sun casts a toxic shadow, if the platform creates massive wealth inequality or destabilizes mental health or ruins local economies without providing a safety net, society will eventually find a way to shut that sun down. Survival requires profound self-restraint.
It's a staggering amount of pressure. You have to be a visionary technologist, a macroeconomic genius, and a philosopher king all at once.
It's a tall order.
So with all this philosophy, psychology, and macroeconomics laid out, how does a founder actually execute this blueprint day to day? How do you actually build a sun from scratch?
Chapter 12 of the text provides a highly practical synthesis of everything we've discussed. It starts with the 10 non-negotiables for evaluating a new idea.
Okay, what are the non-negotiables?
Before a founder writes a single line of code, they have to ask, is this market truly planetary? Does this model have near zero marginal cost scaling? Does it inherently possess compounding multi-layered network effects?
Can this eventually become invisible infrastructure?
Right. Does it increase human freedom and agency rather than centralized control?
And if the idea doesn't meet those specific criteria,
Then it might be a phenomenal, highly profitable, billion-dollar business, but it is not a Solara blueprint. It's just another unicorn.
and if the idea does meet the criteria, the entire strategy for funding the company completely shifts. You aren't just running the old playbook of raising a seed round, a Series A and a Series B, just to show a graph of user growth going up and to the right. The author breaks the funding journey into distinct structural phases.
The first phase is proof of possibility. You aren't proving the unit economics yet. You are proving to the world that this new future can actually exist.
Right.
The second phase is network ignition. This is where capital is deployed specifically to trigger those viral loops and ecosystem dependencies we talked about.
Then comes infrastructure expansion. This is the massive, heavy capital phase. This is where you are raising billions to build out physical data centers, global logistics networks, and navigating international regulatory compliance.
And finally, the phase of consolidation into default infrastructure. At this scale, you aren't really pitching venture capitalists anymore. You are partnering with sovereign wealth funds or directly with national governments.
And as you deploy that capital, you have to navigate the hiring paradox. We talked earlier about tech compression and scaling without adding mass. The paradox is that you must scale capability infinitely without scaling bureaucracy.
Right.
So who do you actually hire?
A Solara is built by a very specific hybrid workforce. You rely on AI agents for almost all operations, execution, code generation, and logistics.
So you don't hire humans for the day-to-day output.
No, you only hire humans for high-level judgment, moral governance, and ecosystem architecture. The ultimate goal of the Solara founder is to build a very small, highly concentrated brain of brilliant humans controlling a massive planetary automated machine.
I think the most profound insight in this entire blueprint comes at the very end of the book. It's the author's closing message to builders. Stop chasing valuation.
It's a powerful shift in mindset. Valuation, the price tag investors put on your company, is really nothing more than a prediction market about your future. It's a guess.
If you wake up every day obsessing over that number, you start making short-term, fragile decisions optimized for perception. You inflate narratives.
You cut corners on the trust stack to show a spike in quarterly revenue.
Exactly. You build a fragile system that looks shiny on the outside, but is completely hollow on the inside.
A Solara is fundamentally not built by chasing a valuation. It is built by chasing a vision of the future that is so large, so undeniable, and so inevitable that it pulls valuation toward it like a gravitational force.
The founder has to stop asking, how do I tweak my product to become a trillion-dollar company?
And start asking, what massive structural system can I build that will make the human experience fundamentally different 10 years from now?
So to pull all of these massive concepts together and recap this epic journey, we have witnessed the death of the fast, valuation-obsessed, exit-driven, venture-backed unicorn.
The magic trick became a formula, and the formula became ordinary.
In its place, we are seeing the birth of the Solara, a radiant trillion-dollar infrastructure engine.
And building one requires a completely different species of entrepreneur. It requires overcoming the imagination gap to authorize the future.
It requires fully integrating autonomous AI as the central nervous system, rather than just a software tool. It requires decoupling your growth from your physical costs through planetary distribution.
And above all, it requires exercising deep, structural, moral governance to manage the incredible shadows that a sun of that size inevitably casts.
Whether you are literally trying to build one of these platforms, whether you are investing your capital into the markets, or honestly, whether you are just a citizen trying to understand why the digital world operates the way it does, understanding these suns is the master key.
They really are the new operating systems of our shared reality.
Yeah. And understanding their blueprint is the only way to understand the future of human coordination.
Which leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative thought to chew on as we wrap up.
Lay it on us.
We've talked extensively about the author's concept of Solaras operating as quasi-sovereign entities managing their own economies, establishing truth infrastructure, and governing billions of users.
Right.
If we take that to its absolute logical conclusion, what happens when multiple Solaras collide?
Oh, wow.
Imagine a future not too far from now where these massive platforms don't just sit across the table and negotiate with traditional geographically bound governments. Imagine they begin to issue their own stabilized global digital currencies.
Okay.
Imagine they begin to govern their own global citizen users through complex cross-platform reputation systems that matter more than a national passport.
That's intense.
Imagine they begin to engage in geopolitical diplomacy directly with one another, negotiating trade treaties between digital ecosystems. We could be looking at a near future where the most powerful, influential actors on Earth aren't traditional countries at all. They are borderless, AI-driven nation-states disguised as tech platforms.
That is a wild, awe-inspiring, and frankly terrifying thought to leave off on. The geography of power is completely shifting. We've napped the edge of the world today, and the mythical dragons have been replaced by invisible planetary data centers. Keep questioning the invisible infrastructure of your reality, and thank you for joining us on this deep dive.